All right, we are live and recording. We'll just give it a minute for attendees to join us.
Sorry, your sound disappeared there for a second.
Oh, it did. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
But I don't think I heard what you said.
Oh, just that we'll wait a moment for attendees to join us and then we'll get started. Welcome attendees. I see everyone joining.
All right.
We'll get started shortly. I see a few folks watching on Facebook. We'll get started here shortly. Thanks for joining us.
Maybe this is the time to fill with the jokes.
Yeah, I haven't quite perfected my, Johnny Carson with these workshops yet, but it would be appropriate.
At some point, I wanted to try myself at a stand-up routine. Still have never done that.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
That scares me a little bit to do.
Certainly here too.
Yeah,
and that's why I believe it's probably a great thing to do.
Yeah, good practice for sure. I'd come to your stand-up.
All right.
Well, Jack, what do you think about us getting started, and then and if other attendees come in, we can loop back on anything that they may have missed. Be flexible with that. So participants, attendees, thank you for joining. This is part of our online Fix Affairs. The Fix Affairs are usually in-person resource events that we hold through the winter seasons about 3 times a year. They're hosted by the City of Portland. I'm one of the co-coordinators, Wing Grabowski. And since the pandemic started, we've been doing workshops online, bringing them to you in the comfort of your own home or wherever you can get internet access. So if you're an attendee in the Zoom session, you can hover over the screen and you'll see some options for chat and Q&A. Raising your hand, you can use any of those, and we're looking for those, so that's a way to communicate. I've also allowed all attendees to speak, so if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and talk to us. And I see a few people watching on Facebook as well. If you leave a comment, we'll see that, and I can relay that back to our presenter. And speaking of presenters, today we have Jack from Multnomah County joining us. Jack, thank you so much. Feel free to take it from here.
All right. Thank you, folks. Great to almost see you. It is hard for me to do this presentation online. I'm so used to having an actual classroom full of people filled for this class that we've been working on modifying, perfecting, and teaching for close to a decade now, I want to say. Well, I've been teaching it this is my 8th year. And this is truly something that I am passionate about. I feel that there's so much that we can do, or rather, sometimes so little that we can do to improve our comfort, health, energy efficiency, and safety and resilience of our homes. So, and this is what this presentation is really all about. What people like myself do, and let me turn on the actual presentation here, is we analyze houses and let me just a sec. Okay. All right. So I'm part of Multnomah County Weatherization program. What this program is a program that helps low-income families to improve energy efficiency of their house. And what is really driving us is reducing the energy consumption and therefore energy bills for people. But what we have been finding more and more is that when we make houses energy efficient, we actually make them significantly more comfortable. We also are making them more resilient and healthy. So health is a really important part of our work. The way I like to hold these classes is, by the way, feel free to ask questions, raise hands, and just yell out your questions. Considering how few people we have here, that should work. I really want to work with the people who are actually watching. And so what we do is we go to people's homes. I'm one of the 5 inspectors, energy auditors that we have. So when people apply to us, once they qualify income-wise, so families who are below certain income are eligible for our program. And we serve regular homes, we serve mobile homes. Apartments are a little challenging because we have to qualify the whole building. So if there is an apartment complex where more than 2/3 of the people qualify for our program live, we can actually do the whole apartment complex. But that's, a tall order. So we can even help people who rent houses as long as you have a good relationship with the landlord and they are willing to assist in just agreeing to sign the paperwork. And so we go in and we do a full proper home energy audit or home energy assessment, and we figure out what can be done to make the house better. And it's people like myself who go in and look at things. And when we think about houses, most people think about things that you can see. I would argue that most important things that determine energy efficiency, health, and comfort of your houses are found in spaces like this one. And that's where we crawl, spaces that we do not see. Crawl spaces, insides of walls, attics, and things that we observe in there are determining how well our house is performing. And so that's what people like myself are doing. And in this presentation today, I hope to enlighten you a little bit on how things that you think might be affecting the and maybe not that high of a priorities. So let's just jump right in. Let's just talk about energy efficiency, right? We live in this culture where it seems that everybody loves energy efficiency. Going into this industry over a decade ago, that's what I was thinking about myself. What I was thinking about is I want to save energy, I want to save money, and I thought that those are the main motivators for people. And I wanted to save the environment. Now my thinking is a little different and has evolved, but let's start with the energy efficiency. So what does it take to make a house energy efficient? I like to do a little cardboard box routine. So imagine a cardboard box. What do we need to do to make it energy efficient? And the answer is pretty simple. So in order for it to retain heat, right? So imagine we want to put some eggs in it and just keep them at a constant warm temperature. And we want to spend the least amount of energy doing that. So we only need to do 2 things for it to retain heat. We need to make it airtight, and then we need to make it well insulated all around. And the reason why I'm even talking about cardboard boxes is because same exact principles apply to a house. So that cardboard box is your house. So what we need to do is to make it airtight as possible, because the air that moves through the house is carrying away the heat. And same amount of air comes in, and you have to reheat it. And heat also moves out of the house in all directions. That whole saying heat rises is not quite accurate. What it is meant to say is warmer air is more buoyant than the cold air. So yes, warmer air floats up and goes out in the attic, and then the cold air comes in through the basement, through crawl space, and you have to reheat it. But heat actually moves in all directions through insulation or through lack of such. That's why we really want to insulate all the surfaces all around. So how do we go around doing it? There are definitely some important details, but basically we have to first really determine what part of the house is conditioned and what is not, right? If we have a simple range home, it's usually pretty simple. Like if we had a range home like this part, we would just insulate the attic, insulate the attic floor, right? So the ceiling of the house. The attic would end up being all unconditioned. The walls are pretty much always the barrier between conditioned and unconditioned space, other than, say, garage walls. Right? So the wall between the house and the garage is a barrier. But then if we have a crawl space, it's probably unconditioned. If we have a basement, like here, it's probably conditioned. That's probably where you have your mechanical equipment, your ducts. So you're probably heating that space already. And so once we determine where that boundary goes through, we want to make sure to air seal it and insulate it. And what's important is that those two boundaries, the part that is airtight and the insulation, are together. They need to be aligned. Okay, so let's jump into the attics. So a lot of times when I go into people's homes and I look around, people tell me like, oh yeah, I've peeked into my attic and it seems to be fine. There is insulation there. I think we're right. And then I look in there and I see stuff like this. So for example, like this is bare ceiling. There is no insulation whatsoever. Here, there is a little bit of insulation in other parts, just a couple of inches. And most houses will have some, right? So people look at it and think like, well, if 3 inches of insulation, that looks not too bad. If I had a 3-inch thick blanket, I would be pretty warm, right? Well, 3 inches of insulation is somewhere around R9. And R is how the insulation value is rated. The more insulating it is, right? So the code right now for insulation of attics around here is R49, which means that we want to have over a foot of insulation on our ceilings. Right? Almost a foot and a half to even closer to 2 feet. Depending on type of insulation, we're looking at about 17, 18 inches. So 1.5 feet of insulation continuously blanketing the attic. And then, of course, before we insulate anything, we want to make sure that things are airtight. And we want to make sure that everything else is done in the attic. So like in that, like these ducts right here. This happens to be a duct. It's really undersized. It's completely uninsulated. And somebody tapped into it to power an addition. No wonder that no heat ever reached that place. But we'll talk about ducts a little bit later. So here's another typical attic. And this is, as far as attics are concerned, is not even that bad. But around here, we don't see as many bats as blown-in insulation. And there's nothing inherently wrong with bats, other than if they are not installed meticulously, and usually they are not, they create a lot of gaps. So there are areas where it's not even. So there is gaps where insulation is creates pathway of air to the actual ceiling. And so the heat can just get off those surfaces. We don't want that. So blown-in insulation is generally preferable to fiberglass bats. What we do is we blow in insulation over this. First, of course, we would take care of all kinds of bathroom fan ventings, any kind of vent fans that there might be, any kind of electrical open splice boxes, and stuff like that. And just blow over the existing bats, and that will create a continuous good blanket and fill all of those gaps. Oops. So stuff like that is not atypical. Here is an attic where some kind of, like, I can clearly see that it's some kind of animals or birds that got in there and moved the insulation off one spot and created nests in the other spots. Do we have any questions right now? I'll take it as no. Is anybody alive there? I feel like I'm talking to.
I'll let people chime in if they want to speak up with questions. I'm just checking out the Facebook. We had an unrelated question, but I don't see any questions for you right now, Jack.
Okay, great. Yeah, folks, feel free to just ask whatever questions. If you're seeing something on the pictures that you find interesting, curious about, ask. I really like interacting with humans. Okay, let's move on. Oops. And a lot of times we find some really funky, interesting things in houses. And I belong to the weird category of people who just loves to crawl around attics and crawl spaces and gets excited about finding some weird things. Like here is, for example, a staircase well that would have been much better if it was just covered over with a piece of plywood or something and insulated over. It would decrease the surface area of the heated area and decrease the amount of heat that gets off it. It would also be easier than insulating all of those walls, which might be a little bit counterintuitive. So recessed lights, that's a really great opportunity to air seal. A lot of air usually moves through them. From the attic, a lot of times I can see the light shining through. And then insulate over. If they range in their rating. So if you have recessed lights, not all of them you can just blow insulation over. Some of them need to have boxes put over.
Hey, Jack,
if you happen to, yeah.
I see a question in the question and answer box. Do you want me to read it out for you?
Yeah, please.
Okay, great. So the question is, perhaps you'll get to this, but I do wonder if it is possible for people to just add a layer of insulation themselves in attics in such conditions, or replace old thin insulation. Do we need to get contractors to do this for us?
That is such a great question. So one of the premises of this presentation and where I'm leading is I would advise anybody to get a professional home energy audit, right? In order to really prioritize and assess what really is important to do and what makes sense to do. blowing in insulation over existing layer is definitely not so hard, and most handy homeowners can totally do it. But there's this big but. Before you do that and make your attic way harder to work around, you want to prepare the attic for that. And this is kind of I'm going through things to look out for. So deal with the ducts, air seal, and I'll talk more about air sealing in a bit. Do all the venting, deal with the attic events, right? So if you address all of those things, then the actual insulation is the easiest part of the whole process. Adding insulation is not that hard. You can rent a blowing machine at Home Depot, buy some insulation, and blow in. It helps to have some experience doing that, but I imagine most people can figure it out. But it's the air sealing, it's the preparation of the attic that is probably much more technical and requires some expertise. Again, if you're handy enough, I hope you can do it. In fact, I want there to be more handy people who can do this work properly, because right now we're short on people like that. And most people don't understand the amount of details that's involved. They just go in, blow in the attic, and then cover over the problems that needed to be solved, and then make it harder to work through it, right? So that's kind of where I'm going. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate it.
And Jack, we actually have two more questions.
If you're storing a whole bunch of stuff in your attic, that probably means that you cannot insulate it properly. So in a way, it costs you money to store things in your own attic. So you might be saving money on storage space, but you're still spending it on your heating. So I say try to get rid of it. And here is what an attic looks like after we are done with it. So we air sealed it, we took care of everything, and we put the depth markers. So if you look at here, we have about 18 inches of insulation continuously blown over in this attic. So that is 1.5 feet of fiberglass insulation. And usually people ask question, is there a difference between cellulose, blown in cellulose, rock wool, or fiberglass? For our purposes, generally no. And fiberglass is probably the easiest to access around here. And cellulose is just fine. Rock wool is really wonderful at resisting heat. So I would highly advise to put it around any kind of heat producing devices like flues, chimneys, anywhere where you're worried about heat. Okay, let's move on. Walls.
Hey, Jack.
What do we do? Yeah.
We have another attic related question that maybe we can address. So the question is, we don't have an attic. How do I find out what kind of insulation we have behind the wall? That's a question. I wonder if you're about to get to that with the walls.
Perfect. Yeah.
We have another question too, which is, are skylights energy efficient? And those are the two I'm seeing right now.
That's such a great, okay. I really love the skylight question. Skylights are generally, in my experience, never energy efficient. And if you live with skylights, you probably have noticed that they make your space cold in the winter, hot in the summer. It really depends on, the pitch and how big the well is and how big the skylights are. But yeah, skylights people really love for the light, and they do bring cool light, I agree. But the price to pay is usually not something that people realize ahead of time. So the energy efficient skylight is almost a misnomer, but I know there are technologies, right, where there is shutters and ways to make it better, but I've never seen it actually installed in real life. So there's the answer to that. And as far as insulation and walls, and if you don't have an attic, you still do have some kind of, you probably have vaulted ceilings. Figuring out what kind of insulation in there might be a great thing to do with a device that looks like this. And this is an infrared camera. However, even if you find out that there is most likely there is some insulation, you'll find that. What are you going to do about it? Realistically, nothing. If you have vaulted ceilings, unless you're looking at a whole re-roofing project where you take the roof off and then you put some kind of rigid foam insulation on the deck of the roof and then put roofing over it, you're not going to do anything about it. So realistically, that's going to stay the way it is. But let's talk about walls. So walls is a lot of times in a lot of houses, actually the biggest surface area. So heat escapes our houses through surfaces that are bordering between conditioned and unconditioned space, right? So this balloon that we've been pretty much talking about, that we want it to be all continuous and have no holes and be well airtight, well insulated and airtight. So walls are perhaps the biggest part of it as far as surface area is concerned, depending on the house. And insulating walls, so if you live in the house that was built before 1950s and they were never insulated after the house was built, you probably are living with uninsulated walls. And that means that your space is cold, you're spending way more money on heating and cooling, and it's uncomfortable. So figuring it out is really easy with an infrared camera, but you don't have to have an infrared camera. You can just poke around an outlet with like a skewer, ideally a wooden skewer, and just see if there is any kind of resistance in there. So here is the wall that we insulated. Let me actually show you a little video. So I insulated my own walls, and this is what it generally looks like. So I decided to do my own walls from the inside. So I drilled a whole bunch of holes in my house, and then hired this company that came in with this big machine, and this is what they did. They blew in cellulose, densely packed, into the walls of my house. So each of these holes is for stud cavity between two studs that was empty. So they stick in this hose in there, and you can see that there's this insulation moving through in that hose. Well, let me show it another way. Yeah, so there's their truck with this big, kind of like a giant vacuum in reverse that blows in insulation. And this is what it looks like on the outside as they were blowing. And then I actually needed to open part of my wall afterwards. And this is what on the inside. So it wasn't as densely packed as I was hoping, but the cavity is filled. The reason why I like to do it from the inside is because doing it from the outside means that you have to, okay. So you either have to take off the siding that you have. So you would take a strip of siding off, or rather contractors that you would hire would take a strip of siding off, and underneath it is probably plywood. So you do the same thing. You drill holes every 16 inches or so. You stick the hose in there and fill it up. Then plug the holes, put the siding back on, and voila. What I see sometimes is people doing this, where they just drill directly through the exterior siding. And in really old houses where there is no sheeting underneath, if you want to do it from the outside, that's your only option. I would advise against it, because now these plugs right here is all that's separating inside of this wall from the outside where it's raining. And sooner or later, it's just a matter of time, they will fail. So you really, if you do this, you really have to stay on top of those plugs and make sure that they don't develop cracks and don't start leaking inside the walls. I would rather avoid that. Okay. Knee walls are also part of walls. So knee walls are those little walls that separate attics from conditioned space. So if you have a 1.5-story type house, those are walls that are separating your conditioned space from unconditioned, and they need to be insulated too. It's maybe hard to see, but like this wall right there is insulated. And this door is also insulated for that very reason. So let's talk about floors. So now we want to insulate all around. So we insulated the attic, we insulated the walls. Now we're getting to the bottom of the house. We're getting in there, and what do you know? There's no insulation in there. Well, most houses around here don't have floors insulated. That is no bueno. So again, before we insulate the floor, we want to prepare the space for that. So if there is ducts, we want to address them. If there is water pipes, like right here, we want to insulate those water pipes. We want to air seal any kind of holes between the house and the crawl space, and then insulate. So if we see ducts, we want to seal them. Now, what's the biggest thing about crawl space insulation? And the answer is supporting it. Usually when you hear about insulation in general, say you are in a big box home improvement store or anywhere where people are talking about insulation, when you hear about insulation, you mostly hear about attic insulation. And there's an interesting fact of why you hear about attic insulation, but not as much about floor insulation or wall insulation. I'd be curious to hear why people think that is. But considering the difficulty in communication, I'll just give you the answer. And the reason is attic insulation is easy, right? Whenever you put the insulation in the attic, gravity works with you and it's just staying there. Insulating the walls is difficult because you have to get to it. Insulating the floor is difficult because you have to support it. Now gravity is trying to pull that insulation off. This picture is from a house that is not even 15 years old. This is a pretty new house. But most of the insulation, as you can see, is on the floor and on the ground. And that is because it fell off. It wasn't properly supported. So proper support of the insulation for the floor is critical. Really important part of prepping any kind of crawl space is putting plastic on the ground. Like if you ever see open ground, unprotected by anything in your crawl space, in your house, that means that you might have the biggest possibility for moisture problems in your house. Because two things that come out of the ground that we don't want are moisture and radon. And it's so easy to deal with. Just put simple black 6 mil poly on the ground. It doesn't even have to be airtight, taped, or anything. Just as long as it's there, it's probably working. Here is, I cut into, this is a mobile home floor insulation and just had water pouring out of there. If you have water leaks, things like that might happen. But here is a typical, or unfortunately not an uncommon scenario where insulation is, say, supported okay, but it's not in contact with the subfloor. So this right here is the floor of the house. Then there is the air gap, and then there's the insulation. In this scenario, insulation is doing close to nothing, unfortunately. So it's really important not to just support it, but support it so that it's in contact with the floor. And again, animals. This is a raccoon, I believe, that made a little burrow in a mobile home belly. So when it comes to animals, what we really want to see is that they have no way of getting into your attics, crawl spaces, because if they have a way in, they will get in there. And getting them, trying to get them killed or getting out of there is hard and not effective. The only way to prevent them in there is really not get them in there in the first place. So here, this is more like what an insulated, well-insulated floor is. So you can see nylon twine that is really closely spaced. Like in this case, we're looking at about 6 inches apart, and it's zigzagging back and forth. So this insulation is not going to fall off. Like, yeah, we have some holes in the plastic, but that is actually not even that big of a deal. Sure, it'd be nice to seal it, but this is a good example of. Here is another good example. This is what we like to leave behind. The insulation is supported, ducts are sealed and insulated, there's plastic on the ground, great. So at this point, you might probably be wondering, how come have I not mentioned windows yet? So we have our house airtight and insulated. And why haven't I mentioned windows? Usually, whenever I go to people's houses, one of the first sentences out of their mouths is usually includes the word windows. People say, it's going to be horrible because all of our windows are old and bad and leaky. Or they say, we replaced all of our windows. I think we'll be all right. And the surprising part about windows is that replacing windows is usually not that high of a priority to improve energy efficiency of a house. Yeah, I'll repeat that. Windows are not high on the priority list to improve energy efficiency of a house. It might be surprising because window industry has been really good at telling us, at convincing us of the opposite. And we can really feel, right now I'm actually sitting near a window and I'm feeling the draft from that window. This is a pretty prime example. And the window industry will tell me that if I spend $1,000 or $2 on new window, that things will improve. They won't. Here is why. Or rather, well, let me just talk about it. The reason for that is because there is no such thing as energy efficient windows. The window I have right here is actually an energy efficient as far as windows are concerned, which means that it has a R value of about R3 to R4. Remember how in the attic we want to have R49. The wall that I insulated now has the R value of about R13 to 14. The new walls that we're building have to be insulated to R21. And yet the window, the fancy window that we have sitting in there, has an R value of R3, right? So, and if I spend a lot of money on it, I can get to R4 and a bit. That's like R4 is pretty much the max that I can realistically get from a double pane window. And that is the premium product. R3 is what you get most of the time. So you can see how that's a bit of a joke. So as long as you have double pane windows, no matter how old they are probably getting you R2. If you have single pane window, that's R1. So going from single pane to double pane does make a difference for sure, but it might be cheaper to achieve by using storm windows or some other products. So if you're on a budget, window replacements probably don't make sense. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't replace windows. I'm saying that be cognizant of the reasons why you're doing it. It will not make a huge differences in your energy bill. So if you just want to replace windows for aesthetic reasons, for resale value of your home, for ease of cleaning, just because you want to, because you don't want to look at those old windows, do it. But be cognizant, it's expensive and it's not going to improve energy efficiency of your home much. So Windows is in the space of a lot of people's brains that tell them that that's what you need to improve to make your house more energy efficient. So it's not Windows. Is there another thing that actually is super important that people don't think about to put in that space? The answer is yes. Put ducts in there. So everybody thinks about windows. Nobody thinks about ducts. Now, ducts is really where it's at. If you have a furnace in your house, if you have an air conditioner in your house that uses ducts, you really want to make sure that any portion of those ducts that goes through crawl spaces, garages, and attics, any kind of unconditioned spaces, is really airtight and really well insulated. Like here, for example, this is a very real duct that I found in a house. And I wish I could tell you that this is the only disconnected duct, broken duct that I found in a crawl space of a house. I wish, absolutely not the case. I found dozens of them, all right? Which means that your furnace is just heating the street. Your crawl space is the street, and you're wasting a ton of energy, and your house is uncomfortable and dusty. Now you're bringing in all kinds of stuff into your house. And these people live like this for years without ever discovering it. And ducts are generally leaky in almost every house. So there's not a lot of airtight duct systems there. So if you have ducts in attics, crawl spaces, garages, you do want to ideally get a professional home energy audit that will assess the airtightness of those ducts. We use special machines. Let me see. So yeah, here is a machine that we use. It's called duct blaster. So we attach it to the system, we pressurize the system, and we see how many holes there are, how much air is escaping out. And then we have people actually go and seal those holes, and we repeat the test and make sure that now the ducts are much tighter and we're not losing our heat. Like here is, for example, a great example of metal ducts in crawl spaces, in a crawl space. And you see it, so there is a little bit of insulation on there. Insulation is generally great, but we're seeing something really interesting. You see those black spots that, like, it's black right here, it's black right there. Do you guys see my cursor? I keep on using it thinking that you can. If my cursor is visible.
Yeah, it is.
Wonderful, thank you. Right, so those black areas, what the hell is that? Well, I'll just give you the answer. That is where metal meets metal. That's where the ducts are put together. And those are just little gaps between the metal where the metal is screwed together, where those fittings come together, that throughout the years have been leaking so much air through that the tiny little dust particles have been going through the insulation and filtering themselves. So the insulation has been working as a filter and filtered so many of them that it looks black. And that just tells you how much air is escaping out of there. A lot. I test duct systems all the time, and very few of them are airtight. So whenever I see a system like this, I know that it's a major opportunity to seal all of those ducts, and that will help you make your house energy efficient. It will increase the comfort, but really it will also improve the air quality in your house. So that's what I advise to do. Duct cleaning. A lot of people ask me around now is like, how often should I get my ducts cleaned? Because we see these advertisements for $49, super special thing. We'll get to you and we'll clean the ducts. The answer to that question is just about never. Like, if your ducts are airtight and properly insulated, they really should not be ever getting dirty. You do want to stay on top of your furnace filter, and you do want to make sure that your ducts are airtight. But if they are dirty, there is probably another problem with that. So they're not airtight. In which case you might want to fix them and then clean them once and be done with that. Generally, duct cleaning is the surface that those companies do that is their way of kind of getting their foot in the door. And they're not making money of it, but they will try to upsell other things. And if you have flexible ducts that look like, so this is metal. If you have ducts that look like this, I would say never clean them, because those machines and those brushes can actually damage them. Like ducts like this might be damaged by those machines and the rotating brushes inside. Okay, so yeah, another thing, if you have registers in your floor, just lift them up. See, you might find something like this. This is just a giant space where I can stick my hand in there because the register fell down. I can stick my hand into the crawl space. So obviously that's making the house not very energy efficient and comfortable. All right, and so if we sealed the ducts and insulated the floor, it will look something like this. So these look to me like more airtight and insulated ducts. So let's talk about the air sealing, things that I kind of glanced over but did not really cover that much. So whenever you have any kind of holes between the house and attics, crawl spaces, outside, you want them sealed. You really don't want much air moving through. And in order to assess how much air there is moving through a house, we use this device that's called blower door. So it depressurizes the house and it tells us how much air is moving through. And so then we air seal the house and we do that test again to make sure that now it's significantly better. In general, there is a certain amount of air we want to see go through houses. Old houses, most of the houses in this country, most likely the kind of house you live in, was built when the motto that we were running with is a house needs to breathe, which means that houses were built intentionally really air leaky. And there was no measuring of how much air leaks they have or what's going on in there. But we just knew that, like, yes, that there is enough air that we will have enough fresh air. And there was, now we're operating with a new mantra. New mantra is build it tight, ventilate right, which means that we are trying to make a house as airtight as possible. And then we are providing mechanical ventilation that brings in just the right amount of air into a house. So the perfect amount of air when we're calculating ventilation is around 1/3 of the volume of the house being exchanged every hour, right? So imagine the room you're in, imagine 1/3 of it. We want so much air being exchanged every hour. Seems like a lot of air, but if you live in an older house, you might have half or even whole volume of air being naturally exchanged every hour. And on the coldest day of the year, it is probably the worst. And when the temperature, because what drives it is the temperature difference between outside and inside. Like here, I'm, for example, in the attic looking down inside the wall. So there's tremendous amounts of holes between the house and the outside. This is a top plate of a wall. So this is a wall on the inside, but So there's plumbing penetrations that go through it. This is a gap that goes in the attic around every wall, and usually it's like 1/2 inch in size on each side of the top plate. So there's a lot of air moving through houses. This is a fireplace damper. A lot of times I find fireplace dampers that's been open for years and nobody even thought of them, or they just don't even exist and they're not airtight to begin with. So wood burning fireplaces are unfortunately really inefficient. Well, gas ones, any fireplace is actually quite inefficient, sorry. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about efficiency. Now, what about this comfort thing? The good news is that comfort and efficiency go hand in hand. And the reason for that is really cool. There is 4 factors that determine our thermal comfort. 3 of them we understand pretty well, but the 4th one is actually the most important one that people don't generally hear about. So 3 are air temperature, relative humidity, and air movement. Right, so but now the most important one is called median radiant temperature. Don't worry about the name. What it means is the surface temperatures of the objects that surround us. That means that right now, my hand, my arm is exchanging infrared heat with all of the things within the line of sight of it. And if they're cold, even if the air in here is warm, I will be uncomfortable because I'm losing heat, but I'm not getting it back. And so because of that, anything that we do that insulates the house all around makes it actually really comfortable. A lot of my clients tell me things like, now my house feels more comfortable with the thermostat at 68 than it used to feel with the thermostat at 72. And that is why. Once you insulate all the surfaces around, you will feel much better inside. So voila. So how do we ventilate a house? Right. In its simplest form, a really efficient, quiet bath fan with special controls, just like this one, is something that we install, and it brings in just the right amount of fresh air into the house continuously. So it might be counterintuitive, but however much a bath fan is exhausting, same amount of air a house will be sucking in. And now that we've sealed off the really dirty sources of air that we didn't want, like crawl space and the attic, it's only coming in through clean areas, like leaks around doors and windows. Something that people a lot of times are concerned about, but I don't worry nowhere near as much. There is far less air moving through them, and it's clean air. So those bath fans do need to be maintained. If they're left uncleaned for years, this is what they might start looking like on the inside, and naturally they don't work as effectively. So maintenance is an important factor there. And let me talk a little bit about furnace filters. So if you learn nothing from today's presentation, but the fact that you really do want to stay on top of your furnace filter, that is the most important maintenance that you can do for your furnace. The filter is there not to protect you, but actually to protect the equipment. It's not for the air quality as much as it is just to protect the equipment. And if it gets clogged, it might be suffocating and not getting enough air and might burn out. This is a dryer vent. You want to make sure that it's not too long, that it goes outside, and maybe inspect it periodically, clean it. And here I have a little helper helping me out with that. If it looks like this on the outside, well, hopefully you can figure out what to do with that. If it's made of this white stuff, replace it. Don't use this vinyl ducting, not good. If it looks like this, replace it. If it looks like this, yeah, well, you know what to do. What is the most dangerous item in your house? If you happen to have gas stoves, those ovens are probably the most dangerous appliance in your house. So what I'm testing here, so I have this machine that is a combustion analyzer that is, you see, this is the probe of it going right around there. And this is where all the combustion gases from the oven of any gas stove come out. And what it tells me right here is that there's 986 parts per million of carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is the stuff that will actually kill us. In this concentration, carbon monoxide would kill us within hours. So dangerous stuff. Whenever using, if you have a gas stove, do use an exhaust fan. I mean, use an exhaust fan regardless of which stove you use. But if you have a gas stove, especially if you use the oven, especially the first 15 minutes when it's warming up, try not to be near it. Do use exhaust fans, open a window, do anything not to breathe that air. Okay. If you happen to have a gas water heater, that's probably second most dangerous appliance in your house. One thing you can do, let me actually show you a little video here. Oops. Oh, sorry, I cannot find the. Well, I apologize. I did not get video, but you know, just touch this vent, see whether it's rattling, whether it's solidly on there. Right? Like if you can easily move it around, just hire somebody to replace it properly. Getting a carbon monoxide detector that has an actual readout would be a great idea. And my personal pet peeve is air fresheners. They only add particles into the air. Some of them have been found to contain formaldehydes. The whole freshener is only a marketing thing. They don't freshen the air. They only dump more chemicals into the air. So generally don't use them. The number of households that I've been to where people told me that they have children with asthma or somebody with asthma and use these things is surprisingly high. And yet they're poisoning themselves and without even realizing it a lot of times. So don't do that. Okay, I will stop right here and let's see if there is any questions. I think we're at the time anyway.
All right, Jack, I think we have a couple of good questions here. How good are window coverings for energy efficiency and any specific kind?
Yeah, great question. Depends on the window coverings. I wish there was more proper thermal honeycomb blinds, like double honeycomb blinds that are actually airtight. We don't see a lot of that, unfortunately. You have a better likelihood with some DIY stuff if you were to do that. Like if you have a window that, like a big window that is bugging you, maybe creating your own cutout, like insulated foam thing that you put in there once it gets dark is probably your better bet. And I know not a lot of people are willing to do stuff like that, but some do, and it works.
I wonder, so that sounds like you're talking about blinds or drapes, but I wonder if that question, this is a question I have actually, so I'll just ask it, but the plastic film that goes over windows, does that work well? I can't remember if you covered it in the presentation.
Yeah, plastic film is generally quite effective, especially, so if you have a single pane windows, adding any kind of second pane will make a big difference, will make a noticeable difference, right? So, and that plastic that you do with the fan would probably be the most budget solution, totally. If you're willing to deal with the aesthetics of it, go for it. If if you have like old single pane wooden windows, one of the solutions that I like is if you are handy enough, just buying glass, cutting it to pieces and adding second and caulking it into, a lot of times, if it's older windows, they have those smaller panes and multiples of them, like actually creating your own double pane. That is an option, and that will make a difference. Being creative in general is helpful. Or those, sorry, the second pane window that there is another product that is called Indo Windows. A little bit more expensive, but definitely works quite well.
Great, interesting. Thank you, Jack. There's another question here. I have heard that houses need to breathe, quote unquote, and insulation isn't always good. I've also heard that insulating an old house is not good for the longevity of the house. Can you talk about this?
Okay, so a house needs to breathe. That was the old mantra that I was mentioning. If you live in a house needs to breathe type house, well, do at least a blower door test to see how much air is actually moving through your house, to see, like, most likely you have way too much air moving through. So you can still reduce the amount before you need to involve mechanical ventilation in there. And by that, save energy. Insulation being detrimental is a complete myth. There is no, that is not accurate. There is no such, there is no scenario in which you want less insulation than more. That there is a reasonable amount of insulation past which it doesn't do much, but generally you don't want uninsulated areas. So no, that's a myth. What was the third one? Sorry, it was like,
I think that covers it.
okay. Oh, okay.
I've heard that houses need to breathe and insulation isn't always good. I've also heard that insulating an old house is not good for the longevity of the house.
Oh, longevity. Exactly the opposite is true. So insulating is really good for longevity because the better insulated surfaces are way better with moisture. So the better insulated a wall is, an attic is, a floor is, the drier it is, because now you're not gonna end up with condensation in there. So I would argue exactly the opposite. Unless it was not insulated well, right? In like in case with that wall that I was showing, where they drilled a hole through it and just left it potentially exposed to the elements, like, yeah, stuff like that is not good. But the insulation itself makes things better and last longer, not the other way around.
Great. We have another question here.
Any more questions?
Should gas stoves be serviced periodically?
Yeah, such a great question. You know, I've been trying to find people who can clean and tune those gas ovens to reduce that carbon monoxide that they produce. And I found a company that was like, yes, we're going to do that. So I'm like, oh, yoo-hoo. I had a client who, you know, they went in and did it, and it did absolutely nothing. So I'm hesitant to say yes, just because, like, I do believe that there are people who know what to do and who know how to do it, but I unfortunately don't know them, and it would be hard to find them. So that's my answer there. Probably don't bother. Unless you have some trusted professionals who you believe can actually make a difference.
Great, thanks. There's some appreciation in the chat. Thank you for joining us, for sure. The attendee says this is great, and thank you so much. Well, get back on cam here. Jack, thank you so much. This was great. A really great presentation. Well, I appreciate it.
I'm always worried about and wondering how to spread the information, but then I realized, like, I have so much more information here that maybe we should schedule a second session, because I haven't even talked about mechanicals and stuff.
Yeah, I actually was going to propose that. So I'll email you after this and we can talk about doing that. But this was great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining, everyone on Zoom and a few people watching live on Facebook. Have an appreciation from Facebook as well. Thanks so much. They say. So Jack, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'll loop back with you soon.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Wayne, for supporting and organizing this. This is wonderful.
Yeah, really glad to. All right.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for attending. I feel bad that I can't like see you and interact with you better. But hopefully soon.
Yeah. Oh, Jack, it looks like we might have one more question. If they want to ask, or you can even unmute if you're comfortable with that and ask it. Oh, maybe that was one more session. Maybe that's what they're saying. I get it. Okay. Rather than one more question. Yeah, we'll get the word out about a follow-up session for this for sure. Okay.
Wonderful.
Great. Okay, thanks. Thank you all. Bye for now.
Bye.